Hello everyone, Elzada is with you again, and our Alam team welcomes you to our YouTube channel. In the last tutorial, we looked at how the display property can be changed using CSS. And now, in this tutorial, we are going to take a closer look at CSS positioning. But what we need to understand first is that even without CSS, your HTML element already has predefined rules for how it should be displayed on your web page, even without CSS. So let's take a quick look at these rules. The first rule is content is everything. Inline elements take up the same width and height as the content. So, your content is the first thing that determines how big the objects will be rendered and what the height and width will be, and that in spite of any CSS. The next thing to remember is that the order of your elements on the screen is determined by your HTML code. So the website will display accordingly. So the default layout order is determined by your codes. The third thing we need to know is that children sit on top of their parents. These are three default rules for how things are displayed on screen based on your HTML code only. You can now also set the CSS property, which is the position property, to position the elements on the screen the way you want, rather than just following the default layout. So let's look at some of the ways in which we can change this position property. And the first one is static position, which we already talked about. All HTML elements are static in their default position. And static just means following the HTML rules and keeping the HTML flow by the default. The next is called relative positioning, and it allows us to position the selected element relative to how it would be positioned if it were static. In this image, change the position property to relative of static, which is remembered by default. And there are four coordinate properties, up, down, left, and right, that have been set to determine if the element is moving. Now, there are two important things to remember when dealing with relative positioning. Firstly, when you move an element, that has a relative position, it doesn't affect the position of anything else on the screen. The second is when we change the properties of your coordinates. Remember the box model when we spoke about margins, because we often don't understand. So if you get confused, in the next video, I will try show you on my code.
So in the code, I created three divs, which are colored in red, blue, and yellow, and each of them is 100 pixels high and 100 pixels wide. Let's see how the red div's position from static change, which is relative by default. By itself, changing this position property does nothing. It just starts doing something when you use one of the coordinate properties. So for example, let's do left side. So left 100 px. Okay. And let's move it 100 px to the left. You can see it's just moved 100 px to the left of where it used to be. I can also move it all the way to the right by saying something 200 px. So it now has padding between the left edge where it used to be and the current left edge of 200 pixels. If I say 200 pixels right edge, yes, 200. And now our red square has completely disappeared from the screen. Why? Because the previous right edge was here and has a 200 px margin between the current right edge and the previous right edge, pushing our red square all the way to the left so you don't see it anymore. So if we specify the top to 50 pixels, top 50 pixels, it shifts it down by 50 pixels, but this doesn't affect the layout of another element on the screen. Only this newer version is moved. For example, let's change the display property of the blue and yellow squares so that they appear on the row where we have a red square, a blue square and a yellow square, and then move red square to the right of the yellow square. So display inline block, the display property of all three elements. So we are going to change it to an inline block so that we can still change its width but also display in a row. So let's add this line of code to all three divs so that they are now in one line. So I want to get rid of that vertex and line them up correctly, but now nudge the blue square to the position of the red square. Position relative. Okay, let's give it right margin from its previous position 100 px. And that shifts it to the left. Now lastly, also doing the same. And the last one, move the red square to the right by 200 px, changing its left margin to 200 px. And now you can see that moves the red square to the right. The reason the spaces between our squares are inconsistent is because by making it an inline block, the browser actually adds a bit of space so we can see. Try practice on your own. The challenge is to get a more precise position adjustment. In the next lesson, we will show you another way to position your elements using absolute position. So, well, see more for all of this. As always, we hope that it was informative, and see you soon.